Subscribers to The Australian hear episodes first and get access to all Sharri's work on this topic, as well as unrivaled news, politics, investigations, sport and culture. Go to theaustralian.com.au/Wuhan to find out more.
I'm Sharri Markson, and I've spent most of the past 2 years investigating the origins of COVID-19.
The Chinese city of Wuhan is under quarantine as the outbreak of the coronavirus worsens.
The federal government has raised its travel advice for the Chinese provinces to Wuhan and Hubei to level 4.
This is the front line of the epidemic in Wuhan, and it is bleak.
I'm declaring a public health emergency of international concern over the global outbreak of novel coronavirus.
What really happened in Wuhan?
To start the conversation, there's one person who's seen all the classified intel and has himself shaped the global response to the virus.
Some important developments in our war against the Chinese virus.
Why do you keep calling this the Chinese virus? Why do you keep using this? A lot of
It
people
comes
say
from
it's
China.
racist.
It's not racist at all, no, not at all. It comes from China.
I'm sitting in a hotel room in Sydney during the lockdown of 2021. It's 8:30 in the morning, and I've been awake for most of the night after a 2:30 a.m. call from Donald Trump's media advisor in the United States. I'm sitting under the blazing lights of a TV documentary production. There's 3 cameras trained on my face, and one is so close that it is surely capturing the freckles on my nose. I'm looking at an empty chair on a giant TV screen in front of me. It's beaming in from a New Jersey golf club. I have to admit to feeling a little bit anxious. Donald Trump has a reputation for changing his mind about interviews at the last minute. I've spent the best part of a year trying to land this interview, and I've made dozens of calls to anyone I know who might have a good connection to the retired president. At one point, I even found myself speaking to Rudy Giuliani's girlfriend at 6 a.m. on a Saturday as she was getting ready to have dinner with Trump at Mar-a-Lago. That wasn't how I ended up getting the interview, but eventually Donald Trump did confirm a half-hour slot. The date has already been pushed back once, and this interview was supposed to start about 90 minutes ago. Everything's ready. There are producers in New Jersey and here in Sydney with me. We've tested and retested the connection, the audio gear, the microphones. All Trump has to do is sit down, put in his earpiece, and start talking. And suddenly the Donald sweeps into frame.
Hello. Well, let's get going. Sorry I'm late.
Thank you very much.
Am I doing...
Well, you're doing it with Sharri, so...
Oh, is she in Australia?
Yes, she is, but if you come this way, sir, and sit down, you'll be able to see her right there.
Hello.
Mr. President, how are you? Thank you so much for your time. He's wearing a suit, but his usually immaculate hair looks a little ruffled, maybe because he's just come from the green.
Do you have a monitor that I can see?
The clock has just begun on my 30-minute time slot, and I'm raring to go.
Thank you for your time, sir.
Okay, thank you.
But
okay.
there's a problem. Trump can't hear me.
I think it's an earpiece meant for a child. I really do. It's so small that it won't stay in. Can they make it a little more tan?
Trump's looking at himself in the monitor and thinks he looks a bit pale, so he's asking the crew to turn up the warmth so he looks more tanned.
They're actually going to
I know, they'll do it later.
colorise everything up.
Usually when Australian politicians do an interview like this, their media advisor will call beforehand to ask what topics will be discussed.
Are we talking COVID?
We're talking
the origins of the virus, what really happened in Wuhan.
Yeah. What really happened in Wuhan? I don't think you want to know.
Yeah.
I was surprised when this didn't happen with Donald Trump. And it seemed the president didn't know what we were here to talk about.
Yeah.
Have you heard anything in your ear?
No, I don't hear anything.
I don't think he can hear me. They can't
It's out. It came out again. This is terrible.
He can hear me now, but the earpiece keeps falling
A
out.
lousy earpiece. It doesn't stay in. It's not going to stay in either.
Is there another one we can
No, it
swap
just
it
came
with?
out again. Look.
I don't want to
larger
start the
earpiece
interview
than that,
off
just
with
a
Trump
larger
in a bad
piece
mood.
of plastic, because it was just too small. I have very large ears, I guess.
So I tried to lighten the atmosphere with a very lame joke.
Too small.
They say people with
They say
big
people
ears
with
are
big
very
ears
successful.
are very successful.
And come from Australia.
Luckily, he ran with it.
Would you like to give it another shot, sir?
Yeah, I want to give it one more shot.
Is there a different earpiece?
Is there a different earpiece we could try?
I can hear you good there.
Oh, you can
Is
hear
that
me
good
perfectly.
enough?
You can hear me perfectly.
I can hear you there very well.
Excellent.
And do you have a little hairspray real fast? Anybody?
And finally, after 9 minutes, a third of my interview time slot, we're ready to go. Mr. President, welcome. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much.
The question of whether the virus started in a laboratory was called a conspiracy and subject to extreme censorship. Facebook, the media, the scientific community. There wasn't just a cover-up in China over this. There was a cover-up in the United States.
Well, I think that's true. I think it is a terrible situation. Common sense tells you it most likely, and when I say most likely, like 95% came from the Wuhan lab. I don't know if they had bad thoughts or whether it was gross incompetence, but one way or the other, it came out of Wuhan and it came from the Wuhan lab. When you mentioned this in the United States, they went absolutely crazy. I have no idea why, but you have no idea why a lot of things happen nowadays when you look at all the stupidity that you see all over, whether it's in Afghanistan or along our southern border. But no, I believe it came from the Wuhan lab, and I think now most people are agreeing with me. Before, they censured you and did all sorts of things if you even suggested it. And you wonder, why is the United States, a certain group of people, so closely aligned with China? And I'm not saying bad or good about China. I'm not saying it was anybody's fault. It was probably gross incompetence. But that's where it came from, in my opinion.
Do you think the fact that the scientific community, the media, even the tech giants played into the Chinese line that insisted this was a conspiracy theory, was that Chinese disinformation?
I don't think so. I think it was the tech giants going crazy, and they probably want to curry favor with China because they make a lot of money from China. And I'm not sure that China made them do it or suggested that they do it. It's possible that they did. But, I mean, people were being banned from Twitter and being banned from everything, and the media was going crazy if you even suggested it. Now everybody is saying pretty uniformly it probably came from the lab. But I would certainly say that big tech, they played right into it and probably played it.
Look, you were the first world leader who publicly said the evidence shows COVID-19 most likely came from the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Take me back to that time. What evidence were you presented with that convinced you that it did in all likelihood come from a lab?
Well, I started hearing stories that you have also, that there were lots of body bags outside of the lab. And people were saying there are a lot of people lying down on the streets of Wuhan, and there were body bags. Now,
body bags outside of the Wuhan Institute of Virology?
That's what I'm hearing, and I heard that a long time ago. And if they did, in fact, have body bags, that was one little indication, wasn't it? But I will say, I don't know it for a fact, but that was a rumor that was spreading at the time.
Was that something that came from the agencies, the intelligence agencies? Is that what they were telling you?
I don't know where it came from, ask China. But there were certainly those rumors, and there were those people that said it was fact. I don't know. You're going to have to figure that out, and you probably will be able to do it, knowing you. But I will say this. There were lots of rumors that there were dead people laying outside of Wuhan on the street because obviously there wasn't a lot of room. And it was in that area near the lab. So that would be one indication, and you'll have to see whether or not there are pictures of it or whatever. I heard that there were.
This is the first I've heard of body bags in the street outside the Wuhan Institute of Virology. If it's true, it's explosive. Remember, Trump has never revealed what intelligence he saw that convinced him there was a leak from the Wuhan lab. And this is why I'm so keen to speak to him. But he's being very vague on the details. If this is intelligence he saw, it's a big revelation. But he's talking like everyone knows this, and we don't. Could it be something he read on the internet? This is an incredible bombshell and something I'm going to have to pursue with senior intelligence sources and former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. But right now I have to keep moving. I've only got 18 minutes left with Donald Trump.
And look, all I know is this, that it came out of China, whether it Wuhan or not, but I think it was Wuhan, and the world has been absolutely decimated by it. It cost the United States $20 trillion and thousands of lives. It cost Australia and all other countries another 50 or 40 trillion dollars and lots of lives, the world. And China can't afford to pay that. Even China can't afford to pay it. But the devastation that came out of China with respect to the China virus, as I call it, it's a horrible thing that happened. There's been nothing like this. I guess you could go back to 1917 and the Spanish flu, but we're looking at it now. Nobody thought a thing like this was possible.
No, it's a terrible set of circumstances, and the reality is it all could have been contained within China. Mr. President, when you said that there was a high degree of evidence that COVID-19 came from a laboratory, now this is well accepted. Joe Biden has even ordered an intelligence probe into it, which is due within days. But at the time, you were ridiculed for it, and you couldn't say publicly what evidence you had, what evidence you were looking at. Some of that American intelligence has now been declassified in the final days of your administration. So can you tell us now, Mr. President, what was the most convincing piece of evidence that you saw that led you to believe this came from a Wuhan lab?
Common sense is probably the best form of evidence. I'm an intelligent person. There are a lot of intelligent people. And I think common sense, when you look at what went on in Wuhan, when you look at the devastation, look, China suffered also. Proportionately, it would seem they suffered much less, but I don't think they reported their accurate deaths. I think that it's much different than in certain countries. In the United States, they went overboard. In other countries, they possibly reported them accurately or a little bit less accurately. But I will say this, I think China suffered much more than people think. And you look at it and you look at what happened in China. You saw there was devastation in China too, but I would say proportionately less. And it was interesting. It was confined to a certain area. You look at Beijing and you look at other very important places in China, it would seem that they weren't seriously affected because China was able to stop it from going into other parts of China, but it didn't stop it from going into Australia, in your case, the United States and elsewhere. And I was lucky that I made an early call to block everybody from coming in from China because I saw what was happening in China.
You were called racist at the time. Joe Biden called you racist when you did that.
He called me a racist. He said, you're xenophobic. And I said, define that, Joe. And he was unable to do it because he had no idea what it meant.
Mr. President, just coming back to the laboratory, though, there's so much evidence now that's in the public domain. We know that the virus database was pulled offline in September 2019. There's evidence that the athletes might have fallen sick at the Wuhan military games. There's the blackout period at the Wuhan Institute of Virology when experts say everyone might have been kicked out of the lab for it to be sterilized. And so much more evidence. The declassified intelligence that workers at the Wuhan Institute of Virology were hospitalized and that they may have been the first to fall sick. So what I'm asking you is, out of all of the evidence that you had available to you, what was so persuasive to you that made you think, aha, it definitely came from this laboratory, that gave you the confidence to tell the world publicly, as you did in April last year, that this came from a lab?
Well, some of the things that you said, some of the facts that you just stated, and now they're facts. Before they were, it was some kind of a crazy theory, but it wasn't crazy at all. But some of the things that you just said that are now known to be fact, I knew, and other people knew. But the amazing thing is, even though they knew many of those things, they didn't want to say it. Certainly big tech. I mean, big tech is still really not on board because they're still censoring people and banning people if they say it. I think big tech basically really wants to protect China from anything, whether it's the China virus or anything else. I mean, if you use the term China virus, you can forget it on big tech. So China has a.
But just in terms of the unusual activity at the Wuhan Institute of Virology, what did you think was so unusual?
Well, there was a lot of activity. There was tremendous activity, and then they said it came 1,000 miles away in some bat cave, and it came. That was the new theory. But then China actually blamed it on Italy. They said it came out of Italy, and I said that's interesting. The word corona, corona, very Italian word, and they like the corona word. And they said it came out of Italy. Then they said it came out of Europe. But I think everyone now, even China, probably is saying it came out of China because that's where it came.
Well, now the WHO is trying to say it was frozen food. The WHO is saying frozen food. It's ludicrous.
Well, the WHO is owned and controlled by China. And very interestingly, China pays $39 million a year. The United States pays almost $500 million a year. And China has far more influence. I dropped out of the World Health Organization. I thought it was ridiculous. They were late. They were wrong. Almost everything they said was wrong. And I said, how come the United States is paying almost $500 million a year and China is paying $39 million a year? They were unable to answer that little question. So I wasn't a big fan.
They're as culpable for the spread of this virus globally as China because they advised against travel restrictions. They objected to your travel ban from China.
Well, they really did what China told them to do, if you think about it. So when you say they're responsible, they did what China told them to do. They were like a mouthpiece for China. And here we are paying many times more for fewer people. I mean, China has 1.4 billion and we have at maximum 350, and yet we're paying 500 million and they're paying 39 million. I said, what's that all about? And by the way, I could have gotten a good deal. Like they said, well, come back in. I said, I want to pay less than China. And they would have done that, but I decided not to come back in anyway.
Mr. President, I want to ask you, when do you first think the virus started and how?
So I banned China very early at the end of January. A lot of people were very upset with that. A lot of people in the United States. Nancy Pelosi, Crazy Nancy as I call her, was extremely upset. In fact, she had, later in the following month, she had a big party in Chinatown to show everybody that, it didn't come out of China, et cetera, et cetera. The Democrats went crazy when I started talking about China. But to me, it was obvious it came out. I mean, it was. I looked at the sickness. I looked at what was happening. But I took tremendous heat. As you know, I took.
Of course. I meant more, do you think it started as early as, Michael McCall's report and my own investigation for my book, What Really Happened in Wuhan? I think the evidence shows it started in September 2019. That's how early the virus might have been circulating. Michael McCall says the military games in October 2019 might have been the first super spreader event. You've seen all of the intelligence. There is no one more across this than you, Mr. President. When do you think the virus first started?
Well, some of the intelligence is classified, and I can't talk about it, but it could have been early. I don't know if it was that early. That was very early. But it could have been earlier. And a lot of people got it confused with the flu. And to this day, I mean, in the United States, everything is the, COVID-19. If you die, it's like COVID-19, everything. They make everything COVID-19. And actually, we have a very dumb thing in the United States. If you're a doctor and somebody dies of COVID, you do better than if somebody dies of something else. And if you look at our flu numbers, they're way down this year, like incredibly down. You know why? Because they're saying everything is COVID, because the doctors make more money. I don't think they do that. I don't think they do that in Australia.
But they couldn't say someone died of COVID if they didn't test positive to COVID.
Oh, no, I think there's a big gap frankly. A lot of people that are dying of other things. As an example, if a man has cancer and a bad heart and 5 other ailments, and he was around somebody with COVID, they put it down to COVID. No, they put it down. It was crazy. In my opinion, what they did, the reporting was ridiculous.
You think they're faking the death figures in the US to make them look like more people were dying of COVID?
You'd have to ask the doctors, but they get more money when somebody dies of COVID-19 or whatever you want to call it. There are many different names than they do if somebody dies of the flu or somebody dies of a heart attack or somebody dies of something else.
How do they get more money?
And you know what? When a person has, as an example, a really bad heart ailment and also has COVID and dies, they put it down to COVID in the United States.
How do they get more money if someone dies of COVID?
I don't know. You'd have to ask the professionals, but they did very well, and it's a disgrace.
We seem to have fallen down a rabbit hole. There's about 7 minutes left on the clock, and I have to move on. Okay, look, I want to go back to the Wuhan virus. Do you think this was an accidental or deliberate release of COVID-19 from China? Just by the way, I do not call COVID-19 the China virus, but I'm trying to build a rapport with Trump to try and encourage him to open up.
So I think it was probably an accident. I don't think it was on purpose. If it was, that's essentially war. I don't think it was on purpose. I think it was incompetence. I think somebody probably walked out of the lab and said hello to their girlfriend, which is one story, as you know. The scientist walked out and had lunch outside in a park or something with the girlfriend, and he had it and she had it, and he supposedly died and she supposedly died, and all of a sudden it was around. Look, that's one theory. I don't know if you've heard it, but I've heard it.
Is that patient zero? Was that patient zero, that scientist
I don't know
from
if it's
the lab?
patient zero or patient something else, but that's one theory. I don't know if that took place. I don't know if that's correct, but a lot of people know that. They went outside and they had a lunch.
Do you know how he was infected, that scientist in the lab?
I think that it was incompetence. I think that it escaped from the lab through incompetence. They did a bad job of maintaining it within the lab, within the 4 corners of that lab. And they've also had some safety problems, as you know, at that lab. So I think it was gross incompetence, and it's cost $50 trillion and really set the world back probably 100 years. You'll never make up for what happened, not because of the money, but because of the death. The death is just an incredible thing. And if I hadn't come up with the vaccine, if I didn't come up, I pressed the FDA like they never got pressed before. They don't exactly love me, that I can tell you. But I pressed those bureaucrats like they've never been pressed before. And we did it in less than 9 months. It was supposed to take 5 years. If I didn't press them, I think we would have another Spanish flu in our hands. I really do. I think we'd be talking about the kinds of numbers of people that died in 1917.
One of the great mysteries of COVID-19 is who was patient zero. And Trump saying it could have been a scientist at the lab who gave it to his girlfriend at lunch. The only time I've heard this alluded to before is by former State Department investigator David Asher, who I've interviewed dozens of times and features on another episode of this podcast. But no one is supposed to speak about the classified intelligence the US and its allies hold on COVID's origins. There's so much information that's still top secret. Mr. President, I just want to ask you about this idea, and it was mentioned in the declassified intelligence, that the Wuhan Institute of Virology has strong ties to the Chinese military and was working on secret projects with the Chinese military. Do you think SARS-CoV-2 was developed as a bioweapon?
So I'd like to think it wasn't, and I'll probably have to leave it at that because I want to give the benefit of a doubt. And China was also affected by it, so I think, again, far worse than people think, if you want to know the truth. I think it was affected very badly also, but they don't report the accurate numbers. So I really don't think it was, but nobody can really know for sure, and certainly now most of that evidence is gone, and it's going to be very hard to find out. But I would like to think it was not part of a very sinister operation.
Are there defectors who spoke to the United States about what happened in that Wuhan lab?
Well, I think there are, because I've seen them on television, I've read about them, and I've read what they've had to say. And they certainly have not been very positive about the Wuhan lab. They were...
But defectors who worked in the lab, has the United States spoken to defectors who worked in the lab, who blew the whistle on what happened?
I really can't talk about that. Yeah, I cannot talk about that. I won't be really allowed to talk, nor would I want to. But I have seen publicly people say they worked in the lab, and I don't know if that was true or not, but I've seen that they made very public statements, as you know. Not very complimentary either toward the lab.
But there might be other information from scientists who were working within the lab who spilled the beans on what accident took place within those walls.
Well, it could be, but I really don't want to talk beyond that. I just don't want to. But I have, on the record, I have seen, numerous people talking about it. They worked in the lab, and they were not complimentary to China or to the lab.
Mr. President, Anthony Fauci, your top medical advisor on the coronavirus, in your inner sanctum, in every meeting with you, in the early days of the outbreak, did he ever once mention to you that the Wuhan Institute of Virology was genetically manipulating coronaviruses?
Well, no, he didn't. And, Anthony's been in government for many, many years. He's a bureaucratic kind of a guy, a very great promoter. I give him an A+ as a promoter and probably a C or a D as a doctor or a scientist. But if you notice, I did a lot of things that he recommended. I did the opposite, and I was quite successful. Anthony didn't want to close our country to China. He didn't want to close our country to Europe because, shortly after China, I closed to Europe also because I saw what was happening in Italy and Spain in particular, and then ultimately France, and I closed. But Anthony didn't want to do that. Anthony was really very late to that game, and yet he was very complimentary. He said the president did something that saved tens of thousands of lives. So this was certainly a terrible thing. But I did oftentimes the opposite of what, Anthony said no masks. Masks are really bad. Don't use masks. Masks are bad. And then he, now he's a radical masker. I call him a radical masker. If you wear 3, 4, or 5, that's okay too. So he's done a pretty big about face on many things. And I liked him too. I call him, call me Tony. He always goes, just call me Tony. But he's a tremendous promoter and probably an okay researcher, scientist, but his statements have not been very good.
Donald Trump's falling out with Anthony Fauci is legendary. But beyond politics, Fauci was a long-term advocate of the type of risky research called gain-of-function that was being conducted at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Gain-of-function is essentially manipulating coronaviruses to make them more lethal or more transmissible, often to humans. It's called gain-of-function because viruses literally gain new functions, like the ability to infect humans or to become airborne. Some scientists claim this can help predict a pandemic by seeing which viruses have the ability to jump from animals to humans. But other scientists say that's nonsense, and they say not only has it never prevented a pandemic before, but in fact it could cause one by creating new viruses that are more deadly and more lethal that had never existed before in nature. Back in 2014, the Obama administration actually banned gain-of-function research because of the grave risks of creating a deadly virus that could spark a pandemic. Fauci was one of the proponents of gain-of-function research. And I found a 2012 paper he wrote while I was writing my book, where he actually argued that the benefits were worth the risk of even a pandemic. In my book, I detail how American agencies funded more than 60 scientific projects at the Wuhan Institute of Virology, and many of them involved genetically manipulating coronaviruses, and some of them were gain-of-function research. Some of the money was a sub-grant funneled through a not-for-profit organisation called EcoHealth Alliance. Its president, Peter Daszak, had been working with the Wuhan Institute of Virology for 15 years. He's friends with the virologist you might have heard is known as the Batwoman, called Shi Zhengli. So while this risky research was banned in America, funding was still flowing through to Wuhan, through to the Wuhan Institute of Virology, to conduct the risky research there, in laboratories where the US agencies had no oversight. But what also happened is that Fauci kick-started gain-of-function research in the United States in 2017. And he kept the move very quiet. Not even his boss, the Health Secretary Alex Azar, knew, and Trump certainly didn't. Well, let's go to those statements. We now know from emails that have been released under the Freedom of Information Act that he was getting his advice from the likes of Peter Daszak, a Wuhan collaborator. At the same time, he was telling you that this was a natural virus. His advice to the president, a natural virus, while at the same time, behind the scenes in emails, he was having discussions about whether this might have been genetically manipulated. Does that shock you?
Well, he was dealing with them, certainly, and my thing was a little bit different. I just wanted to stop it. Whether it developed one way or the other, I just wanted to stop it.
But it's important to know where it came from. It's extremely important to know how it developed.
And he was dealing with them, and I guess they were even making payments for certain kinds of research, which you haven't brought up yet, but I'm sure you will. Certain payments, and I ended that too. I stopped that. When we found out about that, he was doing that during the Obama years, and when I found out about it, I said, can you imagine that the United States is making payments to a Chinese lab? So just that on its face didn't make sense, but I stopped that.
When you found out about those payments, and in total I can tell you, because I've looked at all of the scientific papers, there were over 65 projects at the Wuhan Institute of Virology that had United States, most of them, NIH funding. When you stopped that funding, did Fauci object to you? Did he come and see you and tell you to keep that funding going? And Mark Meadows, your chief of staff?
No, he didn't say, could we keep it going? No, he didn't say that at all. It sounded so ridiculous to me that we were giving money to China, and especially when I heard it was going to the lab, and we ended it quickly. Mark Meadows did too. We both did. I told him, end it.
Yes.
But Fauci never said, he never tried to build it up and say, gee, could we keep it going? No, he didn't.
Because I've heard he did go to Mark Meadows and asked him to keep the funding going and not to block it off.
Maybe he spoke to Mark, but he didn't speak to me.
In mid-2021, Fauci gave a television interview where he defended funding Chinese research.
So it was incumbent upon us to study the animal-human interface and to understand what potential these viruses have of infecting humans, which then might damage the United States. So you don't want to go to Hoboken, New Jersey, or to Fairfax, Virginia, to be studying the bat-human interface that might lead to an outbreak. So you go to China.
I haven't heard that. I really haven't heard that. I didn't like the idea that we're funding China for anything, and that's basically why I cut it off. And I was really met with very little resistance. Don't forget, this was started with Obama, and I guess you could say Obama-Biden, but perhaps Biden didn't really figure out what was happening. Who knows? But this was started during the Obama administration.
The Obama administration did hit pause on gain-of-function research, though, and that was lifted under your watch. Why did you allow the gain-of-function research to continue?
Well, I think probably people that worked for me looked at it, and at one point they might have done that, but ultimately what we did was we shut it off. We shut the whole thing off, and we stopped making payments that were approved much earlier than our administration.
Well, Trump's right in that in April 2020, he ended the EcoHealth subgrant to the Wuhan Institute of Virology, but that's not the question I asked him. Do you regret now not paying closer attention? I mean, this gain-of-function research is extremely risky, banned under the Obama administration and then kick-started in 2017 under your watch.
Yeah, no, I think we've done an incredible job between the vaccine and between all of the Operation Warp Speed and also getting all of the gowns and all of the everything, the ventilators. We became the kings of ventilators. We made thousands and thousands from having almost none. I think we did a great job, and people are now starting to see what a great job we did.
Sherry, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you.
can I just do a couple more, if that's okay? Just a couple more. We've been going for 35 minutes now, and Trump's advisor is really pushing me to wrap it up. I don't know if this is because he doesn't like the way the interview's going or if the former president is really late. This is Trump's first interview with an Australian media outlet since he became president back in 2016, and I can't miss the opportunity to ask him about the critical issue of Afghanistan and Taiwan. Since the collapse in Afghanistan, China, through the global mouthpiece, through its propaganda mouthpiece, the Global Times, has said that this American leadership failure indicates that should China invade Taiwan, America won't lift a finger. When you were president, would you have come to the aid? Would you have defended Taiwan if China had invaded it?
I don't think China would have said that. When I was president, I had an understanding with China, had a very good relationship with China, and President Xi, they would have never said that. I think they're seeing it now because they see very weak leadership, pathetic leadership. I also think that when you look at Afghanistan, where they moved out the military before they moved out the civilians, where they left all of this, hundreds of millions of dollars and even billions of dollars of equipment behind without taking it out, I think it's very disgraceful. And I will tell you, I think China had a lot of respect for the United States when I was president, and frankly, respect for me. And until the COVID-19 came, or the China virus, whatever you want to call it, President Xi and I had a great relationship. Once that came, we made a tremendous trade deal, as an example. Once COVID came, and once I saw what was going on, it really ended the relationship with China. But China does not respect our country anymore. They respected a lot when I was president. They don't respect it now, and they certainly don't respect Joe Biden. And I think probably bad things could happen with respect to Taiwan.
And so you think Biden won't come to Taiwan's aid should China invade Taiwan?
Sherry, you asked for one last question.
Yeah. I don't know whether or not he would come. You'd have to ask that question to him. Yeah. But I can tell you that during my years as president, China had a lot of respect for our country. And I have respect for China, and I have respect for President Xi, but China had a lot of respect for the United States.
Were you really planning to bomb bases in Afghanistan at the same time as you're pulling troops out?
I put out that statement, and that was a very simple statement to put out. The first thing you take out are the civilians. The next thing you take out is the military equipment. And then you take out the military when everything is finished and bomb the bases before you leave so that nobody else can use them. And that's what we did.
Thank you, Sherry.
Thank you, Sherry.
Thank you so
Great
much.
honor.
I would love for Lynn to show you my book, if that's okay, the book that I've got coming out.
Sure.
I'll show it to you. I think she's got a copy there.
Sorry, it's just the cover of it, sir.
Oh, good.
Yeah,
Well, I can see. Good.
Yeah.
I look forward to reading it.
Thank you
I
so
look
much,
forward.
Mr.
Thank you
President.
very much.
Really enjoy your time.
Thank you very much. Good job.
Thank you very much, Mr.
Thank
President.
you. Bye.
Please close the laptop.
Okay, we off? Turn everything off, please.
Yeah.
Cameras.
And the screen goes black. It's been a stunning interview with new information I hadn't heard before. The body bags outside the Wuhan lab, the dead scientist, and that Fauci kept quiet in Oval Office meetings about gain-of-function research. Trump has implied that Wuhan Institute of Virology defectors have cooperated with American intelligence agencies, saying he knows he wants to talk about it, but he isn't allowed. What you've just heard is the mercurial and master politician at work, at times deflecting and obfuscating. There's no question Trump looms large over the story of COVID-19. You can't separate the search for the COVID origins from the fact that the pandemic unfolded during a very fevered and divisive election year in the United States. An issue that should never have been politicized, finding out how this pandemic started, became the hottest political issue of all. From the moment Trump said in April of 2020 there was evidence the virus leaked from a laboratory, scientists, media outlets, and the political class started dismissing it as a conspiracy. If Trump said it, it had to be wrong. And later in this podcast series, you'll hear the former head of MI6, Sir Richard Dearlove, talk about this very point and say that in a way, Trump contaminated the issue of the search for the origins. What Really Happened in Wuhan is presented by The Australian. It's written and produced by me, Sharri Markson, and The Australian's editorial director, Claire Harvey. It was produced by Leah Samaglu. My book, What Really Happened in Wuhan, is available online at Amazon, in bookstores in Australia at Dimox, or wherever you buy your books.